Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're having a great day, getting ready for Shabbos. I wanted to do a couple of Rashis from the sixth Aliyah of our Parsha Ekev. In the sixth Aliyah, we have the second paragraph of Kriya Shema, which we say every day, multiple times a day. V'hayim Shema tishmo mitzvosai, asher anochi metzaveschem hayom. If you listen to the mitzvos that I'm commanding you today, what are those mitzvos? La'avas Hashem Elokechem, u'lovdo b'chol v'chem v'chol nafshechem, to love God and to serve God with all of your heart and all of your soul. Then, if you do all that, nasatim mataratzachem beito, God is going to give you rain in its time, and you're going to have material sustenance and flourishing of your crops, etc., etc. All the promises that are given to us in this paragraph. And this is the paragraph of Schar Va'onesh, the paragraph of reward and punishment. First section of Kriya Shema is Kabbalas Omach L'Shamayim, the acceptance of Hashem as our king, acceptance of mitzvos here, and going forward into the realm of mitzvos, the idea of schar va'onesh, of reward and punishment for those mitzvos that come along with the Torah. So I wanted to just do a couple of short Rashis, all on this first pasuk, which I think are just interesting, not necessarily connected to one another. The first, v'hayim shamoa tishmeu, the double language, shamoa tishmeu. There's a lot of shmiya, by the way. If you look through these parshios, last week's parsha, this week, next week, there's shmiya and re'iyah. Both are verbs that are very commonly used, but there's a lot of shmiya. There's a lot of listening. There's much to say about that as being a listening religion as opposed to a seeing religion, and all of what that entails, especially as we look forward towards Rosh Hashanah, where the main mitzvah of the day is shmiya, to listen to the sound of the shofar. So shmiya takes on great significance over here. But the double language is strange, right? It could have just said v'haya im tishmu al mitzvosai. Why im shamoa tishmu? So as we know, generally, the Torah sometimes repeats the word or the verb for emphasis to tell us it's more like not and when you listen to my mitzvahs, but when you surely, or if you surely listen to my mitzvahs, so shamoa tishmu, the double language is reinforced, you surely listen. But Rashi says something additional over here. Im shamoa b'yashan tishmeu b'chadash. If you listen, the double language here is telling us, if you listen to the old, you will surely listen to the new. I think what Rashi is alluding to here is the concept of reinforcing the early things that we know, the early things that we appreciate, the early things that we hear, which in turn makes us more right to hear the later things to come. So he gives another example, right, the double language of forgetting. Im hischat lishkoach, sofcha shetishkach. If you first start to forget, then in the end you're going to forget as well. So taking that counter example, right, if you're not careful about preserving memory, and you start to chip away at it and lose it, so you start to forget a little bit, then in the end you're going to forget everything. It's like a torrent that comes. So the opposite is true as well. If you're careful to preserve that which you hear in the beginning stages, and you're careful to reiterate it and to go over it and to preserve it, then it will only build upon that as a foundation for the later things that you hear. And it'll be easier to hear and preserve that which comes after it, because there'll be a receptacle, so to speak, to receive it. It'll have a foundation on which to sit. It will have a body that's prepared and ready to be able to receive. So it's something important for us to realize that sometimes the beginning of a path is difficult and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work. But once you get past that initial hurdle, things sometimes tend to come easier as we pave the path forward. And I think that's what Hashem is conveying to us here about mitzvahs. It may be a bit of a struggle at the beginning, but if you start by listening with the old stuff, tishmu b'chadash, it'll be even easier to be able to listen to the stuff that comes afterwards. Okay, going forward in the pasuk, if you listen to the mitzvahs that I command you today, hayom. So I wanted to point out here, this is another instance of hayom. Last Friday's Rashi, actually exactly a week ago, we looked in last week's Parsha Va'eschanan at the word hayom, and we compared it to the hayom in Parshas Yisro. All of these instances of hayom are telling us that the Torah should be fresh as if it was given on that very day. So now we have another example of that, and I wanted to mention it so that we could round out that picture. Here it's saying, if you listen to the mitzvahs, which I command you today. Now, God's not commanding them today. God commanded them long ago at Har Sinai. God's been commanding them for 40 years. So what does it mean, hayom, today? Why is it today? So today, shiyu aleichem chadashim ki'ilu shematem bo bayom. They should be new. The novelty should be there as if you're hearing it for the very first time today. You should be as excited, as passionate as if you're hearing it for the very first time. So that's another concept reiterated here in this first pasuk, right? There's so much in every one of these psukim, and we say it so often that we tend to forget the nuances latent within this pasuk. But I'm going to show you just three of them, and hopefully that will set in every time you say Kriya Shema. Number one, the idea of repetition, Shamoa Tishmeu. If you start, then you'll be helped in the later parts. Number two, Hayom, that the words that we hear, that we listen to, that we think about in Torah should be as if they were said to us today. That's how novel they should be for us and exciting they should be for us. And then the end of the pasuk, we're supposed to love God and serve God, b'chol levavchem u'b'chol nafshechem, to serve Him with all of our hearts. Ula'avda b'chol levavchem, Rashi says, avoda shehi balev, balev zot tefillah. Paraphrasing the Gemara over here, Rashi is telling us that this pasuk of la'avda b'chol levavchem is a reference to a Torah mitzvah of tefillah. The idea that the Torah is requiring us of a certain kind of service that we call tefillah, that we call davening or prayer, because that is the avoda that's balev. Most avoda is external. If it's referring to an avoda here that's bechol levavchem, with all of your heart, has to be an internal kind of avoda, an internal kind of service, and that service is what we know as tefillah, as davening. So this is a hint or a reference or a source to tefillah in the Torah, even though tefillah as a mitzvah is never explicitly mentioned in the Torah. This is where Chazal felt it was most found, and so it's kind of a nice overlay of two things. We have the mitzvah of Kriya Shema, which is fulfilled either through that first paragraph of Kriya Shema or possibly through the second paragraph of Kriya Shema or both, and overlaid on that very important mitzvah d'oraisa, Torah commandment of Shema every day. We also embedded within it have another reference to tefillah, which is kind of that second component, second most important component to our daily davening. Hope you have a great Shabbos, everyone, and we'll see you next week, God willing.